wouldn't find one place to do it, though, let's talk.
Yeah. I thought we were going to meet up in Wetherspoons or something.
Bullshit! It's bullshit!
I'll give me a cheer if you know who Tommy Robinson is. If you don't know who Tommy Robinson is, he was the leader of a far-right group called the EDL. He's sort of like a cross between a working-class Enoch Powell and a slightly shorter, sort of Cockney, sort of, what's the word? A week went by, 2 weeks went by. We ended up doing a bit of research on Tommy Robinson, and we found out the greatest thing you will hear all evening, right? Because Tommy Robinson used to have a real job, because about 10 years ago, being a racist wasn't a viable career option. Like it seems to be now, right? He used to have a real job. This is the best thing you will ever hear. Tommy Robinson, the famous racist. Tommy Robinson, the famous, remember that? The famous Tommy Robinson, the famous racist. His real job was he genuinely owned a tanning salon. That is the most beautiful thing I've ever heard in my entire life, right? It's like, not only does he want to kick out brown people, he wants to make them as well. He's supplying his own demand, what a nuisance. And I got a call from an unknown number. I pick it up, and it is Tommy Robinson on the phone. And the producers had just given him my number without telling me. And he said hello. And I said hello. And I don't know if anybody in this room's ever had this before, but you know when you really hate someone, you've got a really negative preconception of someone you've never met before. But then you speak to them and you have a conversation with them. And they actually turn out to be really, really nice. This was the complete opposite of that. He was worse on the phone, right? He was like, what do you do? And I was like, well, I was doing comedy. And he's like, you're not going to be doing this on stage, are you? And I was like, well, if I go to the Edinburgh Fringe Festival, I might use bits of it for that, if that's okay. And then he went, what's the Edinburgh Fringe Festival? And it's really hard to describe the Edinburgh Fringe Festival to someone who doesn't know what it is. So I genuinely went, well, if you're a comedian, it's like a big deal. If you're a comedian, it's like a massive deal. If you're a comedian, it genuinely is like the Mecca. Which in hindsight was not the most appropriate reference to use, right? And he goes, well, if you want to do this interview, you're going to have to come to Luton train station at 9 a.m. tomorrow. He puts down the phone. So we end up going to Luton train station. We get a secret car going to this secret location because he can't walk around in public. He'll get his head kicked in, right? So we end up going to this posh hotel and we start setting up the cameras and stuff. And I'm sat there and I say to the producer, I don't think I can do this. And as soon as I said that, this big van came with Tommy Robinson and all of his mates. And all of his mates were like 6'3". They were like 280 pounds. They had tattoos on their neck. They had slick back hair. And I swear to God, every single one of them had a beautiful tan. It must be one of the perks of the job. And they all came in together. They all came in one by one. They all sat on the far right. Apparently a coincidence. And Tommy Robinson comes out and he goes, who's interviewing me? And I'm like, I am. And it got weird. It got really, really weird. How weird? That weird? Look at the body language in that thing. I don't know why my legs are that wide apart. It looks like a weird remake of Basic Instincts, like... I'm a slut, what can I say? And I'm sat there, and the first question I can think of is, what do you think it means to be British? And he went, what do you mean? What do I think it means to be British? And I was like, well, I think I'm British because I was born here. And then he went, just because something's made in Britain doesn't mean it's British. And And I was like, what do you mean? Just because something's made in Britain, it doesn't mean it's British. And then he said, well, just because a dog is born in a stable, it doesn't make it a horse.
Whoa.
I'm gonna be honest with you guys, that was the last thing I was expecting him to say. And I was like, dogs, horses, stables? What are you, some sort of racist Riddler? I was like, that doesn't even make sense. I was like, what kind of analogy is that? I was like, you can't describe something based on the location that it happens to be in. You can just say that for anything. Just be like, oh, what, just because a baby's born in a hospital doesn't make it a GP. Doesn't make any sense whatsoever. We ended up arguing for 3 hours. It was the worst interview you guys have ever seen. Then the producer goes, Kai, you've got 5 minutes left. And I'm like, okay, let's not talk about politics. Let's not talk about politics. Kai, think of a question. Think of a question. And the only question that could come out of my mouth at that time was, have you seen the film American History X? And he went, yeah, it's one of my favourite films. Now, if you haven't seen it, it's about a film about two brothers, and the dad gets killed. They become very bitter, very angry. They become neo-Nazis, but there's a really beautiful scene at the end of the film where he just says, life is just too beautiful to be angry all the time. And I was like, that is so perfect for this moment. And I was like, do you remember that famous scene in the film? And he went, which scene? The one where they swap business cards? I was like, I don't remember that scene. And he went, the one where he's got an axe in his hand. And I was like, axe in his hand? Are you thinking of the film American Psycho? He was. It was the worst interview ever. Then the producer's like, Kai, you've got 1 minute left. I'm like, 1 minute? What am I going to do in 1 minute? OK, let's go balls to the wall Oprah Winfrey on this, right? And I just said, are you happy? And he went, no. I was like, what about your kids? What about like your parents? What do they think about what you do? And he's like, they hate what I do. They can't live a normal life because of what I do. And I was like, is there anything that I could ever say, that anyone could ever say, that would make you change your mind? And he said, no, because that is how I see the world. And something clicked in my head, and I was like, okay. Do you think there's certain things that happen to people which don't just affect him, it doesn't just affect their life, but it affects the way they actually look at the world? And he went, I suppose. And I was like, there must have been something that happened to you that made you this way. What was it like as a kid? What was it like at school? Were you ever bullied? And as soon as I said the word bullied, this tough man persona just completely dropped. And he was honest. And he said, yeah, I was bullied. I was bullied really badly. And I was like, were the bullies Muslim by any chance? And he went, yeah, the bullies were Muslim. And I was like, well, I'm sure that had no further repercussions. I was like, okay, if you could talk to your 9-year-old self now, that little boy that was getting bullied, knowing everything you know now, what would you say to him? And just before he got too emotional, he went, I tell him stop being a little pussy and stick up for himself. And the hairs just went up on the back of my neck. And there was this weird tension in the room. And they just ordered some food, which just got delivered, and they just started eating it. And people say, was it scary meeting Tommy Robinson? Because he represents a lot of things to me personally. He represents the scar that my granddad had from getting beaten up by the National Front in the Birmingham race riots just 50 years ago. He represents the leaflets that I put from my nan's letterbox of a famous Tory campaign, which he said, if you want a coloured person for a neighbour, vote Liberal or Labour. He represents all of those things. But the scariest thing is when I met him and you speak to him, you realise this issue's nothing to do with politics. It's nothing to do with immigrants. It's to do with this bitterness and this angriness that he's just let ferment inside himself over all of these years. And there was just this weird tension in the room. And as a comedian, whenever I feel tension, I feel like I need to break it with a punchline, but nothing could ever break that tension. Until he'd opened up the food that he'd ordered, and he had genuinely ordered himself a chicken tikka masala. And I started laughing, and he went, "What are you laughing at?" And I was like, "You just ordered chicken tikka masala." And he went, "I think you'll find chicken tikka masala is actually British." And I went, "Just because something's made in Britain." I love that. I love how your brain can be racist. Your tummy's like, I could really do with a lambooner right about now.